Hello, everyone. My name is Jordyn Smith, and I am the voice and the astrologer of this YouTube channel, Nonconformist Conscience. You can also find me on Facebook and on Instagram under the same name. And I also have a website where you can book or you can learn about me or read a weekly forecast whenever I decide to write them. I used to do it weekly. I don't so much anymore, but this week I definitely did. So I will post a link in the description of where you can find the written report for this week if you're someone who likes to read and follow along in that way. So this week we have Mercury retrograde, Venus conjunct Neptune, Venus entering the sign of Aries. And we also have this solar eclipse happening in the sign of Aries on the 8th. So let me go through this week and break down what some of these astrological conversations are meaning. I want us to keep in mind, like, this is like the buildup before the new moon that is reflecting this solar eclipse in Aries. And it's really important to understand all of this because this is this process of like what is speaking to us and being reflected astrologically as this build-up period is happening right before this new cycle symbolized by the solar eclipse is wanting to occur. So on the 1st, Mercury stationed retrograde in the sign of Aries at 27 degrees. And Mercury and Aries can be really like fast thinking, on your toes. It can be a little blunt. If you have this Mercury and Aries in your own natal chart, I'm sure you've experienced people being like, whoa, whenever you've spoke before. And so, this is a time period, though, during the retrograde to go within. And retrogrades also symbolize this time period of relive, redo in order to resolve something. And whereas Mercury direct is really about our left linear logical mind, brain, whenever Mercury is retrograde, it's really about turning inward and relying upon our inner intuition, really accessing the right part of our brain. It gets us to slow down. So if we're thinking about Mercury and Aries, there are lessons in slowing down, how to be responsive instead of reactive when we're expressing something, to take the time to think and rely on our intuition about how it is that we're needing to express something in a responsible way. And that is also reflected in the natural square between Aries and Capricorn. Capricorn wants us to be responsible. It wants us to reflect, to self-reflect. So during this Mercury retrograde period, not only are we called to really tap into our inner intuition, we are called to self-reflect on what conversations are needing to be had and how do we want to express ourselves in a way that is responsible. There's also this dynamic because there's a natural square between Aries and Cancer to really understand what is emotionally going on inside that is wanting to be expressed, and then to pull in Capricorn and to self-reflect on those emotions in order to really take the time to be responsible with how it is that we are wanting to express ourselves to someone. This can be where we have conversations with someone that maybe we've been resisting or putting off, but we're really desiring to have these conversations as a way to culminate old, long-standing dynamics between, ourselves and another. It's really good to also look at how Aries sits across the sky from Libra, its polarity. So this is if we're needing to be self-reflective and responsible and to reflect on our emotional dynamics, there's this need to really be able to listen to another from where they're coming from. If you're needing to have a conversation with someone this week, or you're choosing to be courageous, Aries, to speak up and to express maybe how you've been feeling that maybe you have been suppressing or resisting doing. This is also where in the sign of Aries, we're in this perpetual state of becoming, and we're wanting to have freedom and independence in order to learn more about ourselves. It's why some people with like a strong Aries signature can always like feel like they're all like there's a self, like an identity crisis kind of always happening. Like, who am I? And they're constantly rebirthing who they are because they're taking in information from the actions that they took, right? It's this Aries Libra dynamic mixed with Mercury. So this Mercury retrograde cycle ends on the 25th, and it stations direct at 15 degrees Aries. So we're going to have these 3 passes. We're at our second pass. And during our second pass, because during forward motion, this Mercury already passed over these degrees from 15 to 27. Now it's stationed retrograde, and it's going to go back over these before it stations direct on the 25th and moves back over. So there's this time period of where we can really utilize this energy to understand what it is that we are trying to express and to rely on our gut, like what feels like we're wanting to speak about. And there's this dynamic of like recovering one's own voice for some, like recovering their voice and the ability to express their emotions and how they're feeling and to do it responsibly. Going back to how this has the ability for us to learn more about ourselves, if we take the Aries action and initiative to have the conversation, to speak, from that action, we get feedback from the polarity of Libra, and we get to hear where another one's coming from, what they're feeling, if they're able to hold themselves accountable, if you are able to hold yourselves accountable, how they're feeling about that. And from that feedback, we get to take in that information, right? Mercury, and to assimilate it and to internalize it so that way we can self-discover further. This again has the ability, because Mercury in Aries is ruled by Mars, and Pisces has the ability to culminate these dynamics of where maybe we didn't speak up, or maybe we were afraid, because sometimes Aries can evoke fear. Maybe we're afraid to speak how we feel. Maybe we're afraid of someone's judgment that's pulling in Capricorn, or the fear creates this sense of insecurity. I'm speaking up for the first time and it's new, and it's creating insecurity because it's new. Or this dynamic of, is someone going to project onto me if, I speak how I feel? Am I going to be viewed as an equal? Or, this can be around conversations of speaking about, hey, I'm really realizing that there's an imbalance within our relationship or some dynamic that's going on. And so there's this responsibility to hold oneself accountable to be able to speak one's piece. We evolve through our emotional body, and part of that evolutionary process is being able to express oneself. And that can be really scary. I feel like that's a universal experience. I mean, there have been times in my own life where I was really afraid to like talk about how I felt. I've seen it so often. And this Mercury and Aries really says like to have the courage. And there's this lesson in that. Where if we're looking at the Libra dynamic, we can't have this expectation of how a conversation is going to go. Sometimes others don't have the ability to listen to where we're coming from, Libra. So sometimes they will project all sorts of things onto us. And so there's this lesson of one, not having an expectation of, oh, someone's going to see the light or they're going to understand. That could happen. That's like best case scenario. There can be this lesson in maybe the healing comes from me just speaking my truth and what's coming up for me. And there's something that's empowering and that instills emotional validation from just taking that courageous act, that initiative to do that. So that way I'm not holding or suppressing this dynamic within me. So this lesson can be around understanding that when we have conversations, especially conversations we're afraid to, or what we would deem as a hard conversation, whoever we're having this with can take that information, Mercury, and they can do whatever they want with it. They are going to have their own experiences and their own perceptions around that information. And this can really give us an opportunity to practice boundaries or to see the truth of a situation and then to make a new choice around how we want to create action stemming from that. But the most important thing is to be responsible, to be integral, to reflect on our emotional dynamics, to have courage, and to allow whoever to do whatever they want with that. It's none of our business what they do with that. You know, if I think all of us have kind of had conversations before where no matter how we say it, no matter how thoughtful we are, depending on that person and what they've been through in their life and how if they have the ability to take self-responsibility or to self-reflect, it all of these dynamics, you can be so thoughtful and it can still go haywire. And so there can be this lesson where there's actually resolution through this dynamic, or the resolving, dealing with the retrograde can be about, I finally spoke up about how I felt, and I feel like I got to resolve this dynamic on some type of level. As Mercury station retrograde, it was in a semi-sextile to Neptune in a new phase. And Neptune is the ruler of Mars and Pisces, and Mars is the ruler of this Mercury. And so we're going to be talking about this whole week into the the eclipse. There's this dynamic of, in order for something to be birthed, to start, to create a new cycle, all of these Aries kind of dynamics, things have to culminate first. So there's this nurturing quality of culmination. And something that's often not talked about with Pisces and Neptune is that this can really be about transcending limitations from within. You know, this semi-sextile in a new phase between Mercury and Neptune, Neptune being the ruler of Mars, Mars being the ruler of Mercury, can be about how we can transcend in our limitations by just using our voice and expressing ourselves. Even if it doesn't go the way that we hope and we want, it gives us the ability to confront the truth of something. like the totality of the truth of a situation. And that doesn't mean that it's not uncomfortable, but it has the ability to help us to culminate long-standing emotional dynamics that are held within our consciousness. You know, and as we culminate dynamics, this Mercury in Aries helps us to get the feedback that we're needing in order to transcend limitations, to take information in and to learn more about ourselves and how to self-discover further. On the 2nd of April, which is today, Venus in the sign of Pisces is balsamic to its ruler Neptune, and tomorrow it will be in a new phase. So to me, again, this is the signature of culmination and starting something new. So later in the week, Venus will enter into the sign of Aries, and again, it'll be ruled by Mars and Pisces, something wanting to start new, Aries, something wanting to culminate, Pisces. So to me, this dynamic of Venus balsamic to Neptune is really where we are trying to dissolve old barriers within around maybe where there have been delusive things that we have. How do I want to put this? It could be like where we're culminating and dissolving delusive values and needs that have been very much conditioned. It's learned, right? That's what I mean when I say conditioned, learned. Like all of us come into this lifetime and we choose our family, which by the way, I'm about to do a class on why we choose our family. And then I'm going to do groups where we can work together, but I'll talk about that later. But we come in and we choose our certain family so we can pick up where we left off of. Like that way we can essentially relearn what it is that we were working on prior to this lifetime. That way we can make new choices and we can understand new emotional dynamics revolving around what we've been learning in order to evolve. So we come in and we learn about beliefs and what we give meaning to and what we value and what we need. These are very much these Venus qualities. What we need, what we give meaning to, what we value really helps shape our inner relationship to self, which is the Taurus sign, and how we interact with ourselves, how we value ourselves, our self-esteem, our ability to be self-reliant and self-sufficient really impacts how we do relationships with others, and that's the Libra side. So there can be a dynamic where, especially because the Libra lunar eclipse really was bringing up where imbalances and extremes have manifested in our lives and how we're meant to throw them off. And that was ruled by Venus and Pisces. Well, now this week before this Aries solar eclipse happens, we have this dynamic between Venus and Pisces and her ruler Neptune of how do we culminate these dynamics so that way we can birth something new as Venus moves into Aries. So it's like this can bring awareness around where there can be delusional values. Like one of them, I've talked about this before, can be like, and what I mean by delusional values is like when we give ultimate meaning to something that we're valuing, right? Other than ourselves or source, like this is where crisis and disillusionment can occur within relationships, especially if you're someone who has like a really strong codependent signature in their chart. Like we can like long for the epitome of a perfect and ideal, right? All of these Piscean words, relationship. And once we get it, we can feel really disillusioned. Like that didn't really make me happy. And it's because happy is an inside job. Self-sufficiency is an inside job. So this can be where we're culminating these dynamics of where we've depended on other people and we've given ultimate meaning to some type of relationship or some type of, friendship or anything, and really being confronted with the delusion behind it. And it's in order for us to really be able to self-improve. Nothing gets us to self-improve more than like really being confronted with it, with the truth of something, right? Like, oh, yeah, that was delusional. Like, I um have had times in my life where I didn't even realize I was giving ultimate meaning to something outside of myself. And then I was met with crisis and disillusionment. And so this can really be a time where we're reflecting on all of this, seeing as Saturn still in Pisces and is ruled by this Neptune that Venus is now balsamic to. It's like where we're self-reflecting on prior events in our lives around where we've experienced crisis because we've given ultimate meaning to something, and that stems from how we've learned to value like people, places, things. It could be about, um I'm valuing and giving ultimate meaning to some kind of career motivation. And then you obtain that, and it's like you feel like the walls of the castle are crumbling down, and you realize like the structure of it was sand. Pisces can have this feeling of, I remember David talking about this, and I love this teaching. Um, when we give ultimate meaning outside of ourselves, it's like grasping sand or bubbles popping once we touch them. Like we're grabbing it, we think we have it, and then all of a sudden the bubble pops. Or, we're grabbing sand and we think that it's going to have like continuity and structure, and then it falls through our fingertips. It's like it can be this feeling. So we're really needing to like self-reflect on all of these dynamics of where we've experienced these extremes, remembering that Venus still rules that South Node in Libra, and really understanding what more universal and timeless values and needs are. That's part of the new phase conjunction, is as we're culminating and dissolving, we have the ability to really understand what more universal and timeless principles, values, and needs are. The other dynamic I want to talk about with this conjunction is this is about culminating these long-standing dynamics of extremes. Venus ruling that South Node, how this has affected our relationships with others, stemming from our conditioning or what we learned about relationships early on. This is also about how healing can take place while we dissolve the old. And the dissolving can also mean that we're dissolving old beliefs about ourselves so we can expand our relationship to self, so we can grow our relationship to self. And this is really seen with Venus being the ruler of that Jupiter. We can dissolve old beliefs that have affected our sense of self-esteem, and then understand personal truths about ourselves that are timeless in nature. A great example is like anyone who has a really big Virgo signature, sometimes not anyone, but sometimes they can really come into this life feeling like they're worthless, that they don't have worth. This can also be a Taurus dynamic as well. And so really understanding that that's not true. That's a belief. A truth is we all come in here worthy. That is a naturally occurring truth. We all come in here worthy. The other type of area, how this can manifest is Uranus is in Taurus. So it is ruled by this Venus that is in a balsamic conjunction to Neptune in the sign of Pisces. So it's like Uranus and Taurus can really be about where we've over-identified with some type of learning or conditioning that has affected our sense of self-sufficiency and self-esteem, or our ability to listen to ourselves. So often we are taught from a young age to listen to authority and to stop listening to ourselves. And so this can be this process of really objectifying this dynamic of understanding how this has affected us and how it has the possibility to create trauma, and the need to dissolve that, because that really stems from a value that has been learned. Like, you listen to authority, authority is the ultimate meaning. You go to work and you have a boss and you have to listen to them, and you're taught like what you think doesn't matter. I see this with a lot of people who are working through generational trauma, where they were really taught this like old school patriarchal theme that you give all of your authority over to a parent. And so it's really about this self-reflection of really looking at the totality, that would be Pisces totality, of how these things have had a cause and effect in our lives, a cause and effect on our relationship to self and to relation with our relationships with others, where extremes have happened, where disillusionment or crisis has happened stemming from this. And as Venus crosses over Neptune and enters a new phase, we can really start to have the fog clear and the dust settle, and to really have healing take place, because we've been doing this inner work of really revolutionizing our relationship to self through dissolving old dynamics. And this has the ability to transcend our inner limitations, to heal us, to really help us to cultivate healthier self-esteem. I mean, this runs the gamut. Like, it's also really interesting to look at the astrology with all of the Taurus energy and the Libra energy of like, if we're learning about self-sufficiency through having to look at where extremes have happened in our relationships, there's this propensity that a lot of us don't even understand how we are taught to be codependent. It is something that is widespread. All you have to do is look at rom-coms, movies, social media, all of these things, that having a relationship is the epitome of like happiness and joy in life. That really creates dependencies. And we're really meant to cultivate self-sufficiency so we don't have dependencies on others. This is like a time period where we can be understanding natural partnership, whether it be friends, family, lover, anything, of where I'm not here because I need to be, I'm here because I want to be. So the other thing is that on the 4th, the sun in Aries is going to be conjunct the North Node. So both of those are ruled by this Mars in Pisces. So again, the signature of something new is wanting to start, but in order for it to start, something else has to be culminated. To me, this really reflects this time period of like, we have really been working on and self-reflecting and objectifying these inner dynamics, everything I've been talking about. And it's like something new is wanting to be birthed now. Like, I've taken in all of this information, right? And now I want something new to cycle, a new cycle to start, something new to start. And so this can be where, in order for new things to start, we're needing to exhaust old desires. Some of us might be exhausting that through getting the sand castle and realizing that as soon as we touch it, it falls. Some of us might be realizing that the relationship that we're in really isn't about independence and freedom and interdependence. It's more about codependence. And this is a long-standing issue. I've been seeing this a lot lately with people who have really been working on codependency for quite some time. And it's like they stayed single for so long and then they finally got in a relationship and now they're getting that Libra feedback and understanding like, oh, this dynamic is still here. And instead of us getting down on ourselves, if we're coming into awareness about these patterns still being there, in order for us to grow, we have to have that feedback, right? You're not going to know if it's something that has culminated unless you take a chance and you have the courage to see. And really, sometimes it just takes one more time of that awareness that new information can connect more dots to help us learn about ourselves, and that has the ability to culminate. These old desires wrapped around our ideals. That's really Mars and Pisces, is exhausting old desires or our desires that are conscious, and knowing whether or not, having discernment, whether or not it's something we should be acting on or shouldn't be, because culmination can happen from us not acting on it. It's still a choice. But it can be around our ideals. This can be like the last like hoorah before like, oh, like I don't need that anymore. It, it's really interesting to think about, you know, if you're someone who's ever fantasized about something, right? This is this Pisces dynamic. Sometimes you don't have to act on it, because just fantasizing about it over and over culminates it to where it's not a desire anymore. So it can even be like this type of dynamic in order for something new to start. So this sun on the North Node at 15 degrees really can speak to illuminating what should be acted on, what shouldn't be acted on, what ideals we have, what fantasies we have, where illusions have happened, where deception might have happened. That's another Pisces dynamic, is deception. So there's all of these things, and that can be one deceiving oneself, right? Like thinking by denying something. Like deception can happen because in Virgo, the polarity of Pisces can be where we deny something because we don't want to see it. We don't want to see the totality of the truth. So this sun on the North Node, or Cazimi is what a lot of people call it, it has the ability to really illuminate these areas so that we can dissolve them. So we can dissolve old patterns, old desires, old dynamics. So that way this process of thrust, of birth, can start a brand new cycle of growth. And it takes action. And from that action, again, we get feedback, and that's how we learn about ourselves. That's this time period. If we're making space by dissolving old dynamics, we're having to face a void, right? There's an emptiness there. What was once there is not there anymore. And eventually, if we pay attention, there will be new desires that emanate from within our consciousness and become conscious instead of subconscious. And then we get to choose to act on them so we can learn more things about ourselves in order to self-improve. The other thing about this day is that as this happens, the moon in Aquarius is in a last quarter sextile to the sun. So that moon is ruled by Uranus and Taurus. So this really speaks to me and reflects that some of us can really be working on looking at the emotional dynamics of where we've over-identified with some type of conditioning that's affected our relationship to self and has created illusions in our life. And the need to liberate from this in order for a new identity or new structure to form, to crystallize, something that's more rooted in universal and timeless truths about ourselves, as opposed to like conditioned or learned beliefs about ourselves. This is really about objectifying our emotional dynamics, moon and Aquarius, and taking the action even if we're afraid, because this can evoke fear because it's something new. So it's like liberating from prior dynamics based around what constitutes our security. So the known and the familiar. That doesn't mean that it's always good if it's known and familiar. It means that it's become a habit, right? And so there can be this need to liberate from this in order to transcend these old limitations and to birth something new. So that's something I want us to keep in mind. And by doing so, it continues this process of transforming our relationship to self, of creating more. This can be about, the moon in Aquarius can really be about liberating from dependencies of where we've over identified with something, that how we've learned to depend on other people instead of ourselves. And through objectifying this dynamic, it helps us liberate from them. And then it creates self-sufficiency, Uranus and Taurus, and that transforms our relationship to self by transcending these limitations of what was once learned. There's this dynamic that's happening this week that's like really gearing us up to start a new cycle, symbolized and reflected in that solar eclipse. And really, at the end of the day, it's about healing. It's about evolving through our emotions and healing. Sometimes that means that, like, we can have emotional trauma that comes up on this day and gets illuminated. And we can see how that has, really affected our sense of self-esteem and the need to dissolve that. Because oftentimes when some type of trauma happens, a belief sets in that is not true. I have a personal experience to reflect this, as I often do. I once was in a relationship that it almost cost me my life. It was, this person is like in prison now. Like, he attempted to kill me and I survived, and it created immense amount of trauma for me at one point in time. But I refused to be a victim. I refused to even call myself a survivor because I didn't want to identify with that. Little did I know I was still identifying with this trauma, because I stayed single for a very long time because I felt this trauma had such an effect on my self-worth and self-esteem. And I remember whenever I got with my son's father, I remember thinking like, this person's too good for me. And that was a belief that I had stemming from this trauma. Like, who would want me? This has happened to me. And it was tons of just like things that happened in that prior relationship. And really what I had to liberate from was that belief. And I had to get to the bottom of it, which was that I'm worthy, that my worth never went anywhere, and that my prior choices don't reflect who I am now. There was this dynamic of, I remember talking to my father one time and expressing how I felt, and him being like, my family calls me George, they don't call me Jordyn. And he said, well, George, you don't ever have to be that person again if you don't want to. And it was something that really empowered me, and it helped liberate me from just him planting that seed, helped me liberate from the beliefs that I held about myself that affected my self-esteem, stemming from the trauma. And that trauma occurred because of the choices that I made. that person was always going to be that person and do those things, but I still chose to be with them. And that's for my own evolutionary reasons. But it can be this type of dynamic that we're having to re-enter and review and reflect and objectify these prior dynamics of where we've experienced emotional trauma, and to see how that has affected our sense of self-esteem and how that shaped beliefs about ourselves and the delusion, right, of those beliefs. That would be the Pisces dynamic. And to dissolve those beliefs and understand our natural truths. I was always worthy. My worth never went away. A great way to think about this, if you're someone who, this is kind of an extreme that I talked about, Libra moon here, but like a great way to put this is like, if you have a baby, or if you see a baby and someone, you know, drops it off on the side of the road, what are you going to do? You're going to go get that baby. And it's because that baby has worth. That worth never goes away. It never goes away. We're all worthy. And so I think it's really important, as we are looking at all of these dynamics that are going on and being reflected right now, to remember that the truth is that we have worth. And some of us might be cultivating healthier self-esteem. Some of us might be needing to re-enter these traumatic fractures so we can evolve through healing these emotional dynamics by dissolving delusions that have revolved around the beliefs that we carry stemming from this. Like, this can also be, you know, you grew up in a family who your parents did everything for you. They paid for everything, they did everything. And so it sent the subliminal message that you weren't capable, that you're capable. Like, unless you have something really cognitively going on, you're capable, or like a physical disability. You can still be capable in other ways. But it's like, you are capable. That doesn't go away. We're all capable of something. On the flip side, this can be where maybe we grew up in a family where we were parentified and we had to be mini adults when we were younger. And so our self-esteem was revolving around, I need to be perfect. So now I don't really know who I am, and feeling shame and guilt around that. This is a week to really look at any way that this can unfold for us. These are just a few, like not even hitting the tip of the iceberg of things that could be reflected in this. So whatever it is, whatever you've experienced, I challenge you to dive into the depths and the swells of your emotions and to really feel and like to nurture yourself. That's also Pisces is water. It wants us to nurture. It's the cosmic womb. Before we're thrust out, Aries, and birthed, we are being nurtured within the womb, right? We're being fed. It's warm, it's cozy. This is a time to where we should be doing that. We should make ourselves feel warm and cozy and really nurture ourselves through this process of healing. So that way, as this new cycle wants to start, we really feel like, you know, man, like I might have to crawl before I walk, but I know that I can nurture myself through it, you know, however this wants to manifest. So later on in the day on the 4th, it happens in the evening, like 11:38 p.m. Central Standard Time. So for some people, this might be happening on the 5th for you in the United States, or, you know, on the other side of the globe. But Venus enters the sign of Aries, where she's ruled by Mars and Pisces. So to me, this really reflects, like, if we're wanting to like learn new values about ourselves in order to expand our relationship, like learn new values would be Venus and Aries. In order to expand our relationship to self would be Jupiter and Taurus, ruled by that. In order to transform our relationship to self, Uranus and Taurus, ruled by that Venus. in order to create harmony in our relationships and not do what we did in the past. Venus and Aries ruling that South Node in Libra, then this learning process has the ability to really dissolve the old. We're needing to learn new values, new needs, what gives us meaning. I would challenge you to learn about your own personal natural truths as opposed to beliefs, to expand upon your inner relationship to self through dissolving delusive beliefs about oneself and understanding and thinking about and intuiting what is a naturally occurring truth. I've given you some examples of that. But Venus and Aries, in order to learn and expand upon our relationship to self and to transform it and to change our inner vibration, so that way we call in relationships that are based in equality and interdependence instead of codependence, we need to create action. So Venus wants us to act on what it is we're desiring to do pertaining to our relationship to self. So maybe that's, I want to read a Brene Brown book on what shame is, so that way I can understand the delusions around, the delusional beliefs around this, that, and the other that really created shame within me. Venus and Aries naturally squares Capricorn. So it's like taking responsibility for this process. And as we act on our desires to self-discover, essentially, we culminate old and we receive feedback in order to understand ourselves and expand upon that relationship to transform it. That way we change our inner magnetism, and that's part of Uranus and Taurus. As we transform our relationship, we change our inner vibration, which changes our inner magnetism. So we get to attract people who are like-minded, are part of our tribe, or part, new friends, new, any type of new relationship where values align, or, anything like that. This is part of this Venus and Aries. It's like a way Aries naturally in conjuncts Virgo. So it's even this Venus and Aries is pulling in Virgo dynamics. In order to learn about oneself and to self-discover, you have to create action, Aries, to receive feedback, Libra, and that feedback we receive, we assimilate and internalize that information, Virgo, in order to self-improve, Virgo. And this is also part of like this Mercury retrograde cycle that's going on throughout this week and the eclipse and up until pretty much the end of this month. This is a time period of where we get to self-discover. It's like, I feel like for a lot of people, if they faced an inner void and they've been waiting for like, what do I do right now? This is the time where an idea or a thought or some conscious desire, some subconscious desire can emanate from within the soul into our consciousness for us to act on it so we can learn about ourselves. Then on the 8th, we have the Aries solar eclipse happening. I'm going to use the houses in this chart that I have pulled up, and I'm just going to, I have it on my screen so I can just look at it and tell you what I'm seeing. And the houses you can utilize because this is a Greenwich chart, so it's for the collective. Aries, we've kind of gone over this. This is a new moon, symbolizing a brand new 6-month cycle. of evolutionary development. And that evolutionary development pertains to what we're learning about ourselves in order to self-improve. Learning about ourselves in order to do this really means that we're changing our awareness around our wounds. I've said this before, our wounds can be what we once felt was poison turns into potion. Going back to my story about my old relationship, I really started to understand natural truths and eliminated delusive beliefs stemming from that traumatic experience, that wound, that deep soul wound that I experienced. And now I get to talk about it and I don't feel shame. And I get to speak about it in a way where I don't feel victimized, where I feel like that was actually an experience that I needed because now I get to help people who go through that, right? It makes them feel comfortable enough to talk to me about what they're going through because they're not going to feel shame or judged because that's how I felt. So this eclipse is combust Chiron. So it has the ability to take a wound and to change our awareness around it in order for, Chiron it's very saggy, but it's also very scorpionic to me because it's like where we can metamorphose these inner limitations regarding our wounds around emotion, like how wounds have affected us emotionally and psychologically. As we change our awareness around it, it has the ability to metamorphose those inner limitations. And that's where you get like from the poison to the potion. And what I mean by combust is that this new moon is conjunct Chiron. And so the sun, the moon, and Chiron are all at 19 degrees and 34 minutes, 24 minutes. So they're even down to the same minute. It's combust. It's like so full of potential. And this is in the 7th house. So it's like there's this new cycle regarding how we interact with other people, our relationships. It has this Libra feel to it. It's like we've been working on all of this South Node old bullshit, it feels like for a lot of us, of extremes and codependencies and all of this stuff. And now this solar eclipse is in Aries happening in the 7th house. So it's like paradoxical, right? It's like, how do I make sense of that? I feel like is how a lot of people feel about paradoxical charts, but it's like this symbolizes that there is a brand new evolutionary cycle starting where we get to learn the next 6 months about how to be interdependent, to stay whole unto oneself within our relationships. We get to learn about what we're valuing and what we're needing, and its natural values and naturally needs in order to have relationships that are based on equality, giving, sharing, and inclusion. This can be a 6-month cycle where we're working on how do I listen to another and hear where they're really coming from? How do I participate in relationships as an equal? It runs the gamut here as well. And Venus is, well, I'll get to that in a minute, but this also has the ability to really change our awareness around our wounds and how those wounds have had a cause and effect on our other relationships where maybe there wasn't healing that happened, right? That wound is never going to actually go away. I still carry the traumatic experience of what I experienced in that prior relationship, but I just don't feel victimized anymore. And it taught me a lot about my natural truths. And now I implement this in my relationships. I'll never have a relationship like that again, right? It was something I needed to go through to grow through. And so this new moon can really reflect this solar energy of like a brand new karmic cycle wanting to happen where we get to develop what it's like to be in relationship to others in a harmonious way by understanding ourselves, but we're still in the state of becoming, We're like, we faced a void, and now we're needing to learn more about ourselves to change the awareness, right? And this solar eclipse is ruled by Mars and Pisces. That's in the fifth house. It's balsamic, so approaching Saturn in Pisces as well. So it's like, as we start this and we get this necessary feedback, that's also this new moon solar eclipse reflects, we need to create action. Aries, to receive feedback, seventh house. This has the ability to help us culminate Mars and Pisces, these long-standing dynamics. And it helps us to culminate also, this is the balsamic conjunction to Saturn, how we've structured reality, how we've structured relationships. You know, this also reflects, because this is in the fifth house, that this is a way that we're self-actualizing. We're self-actualizing through being courageous to take the initiative and action to learn about ourselves in order to change our conscious awareness, how we structure it, how we structure relationships. And that's through dissolving these old dynamics. You know, another signature of this culmination process happening is the South Node in Libra is in the 12th house of this. So it's got this Pisces feel. We're culminating these old dynamics of how we have related to others, how others have related to us. Pluto is in Aquarius in this chart, and it's in the fourth house. And this really speaks to the liberation from any external type of dependency. So the South Node in Libra in that 12th house can speak to where we've been codependent, or where we have had projected expectations or needs on others, which is really externalizing our emotional value, or not being able to emotionally nurture oneself. And this Pluto and Aquarius in this fourth house is saying, no, we need to objectify this so we can nurture, so we can emotionally validate. It's also looking at where we have over identified with some type of dynamic that has created insecurity within. And that insecurity has created the inability to be self-sufficient, or the inability to have healthy self-esteem. And that is really reflected in that this Pluto is ruled by Uranus and Taurus in the 8th house. So this is like a solar eclipse that's like, get to the bottom of this. Like, that Uranus in the 8th house in Taurus is the ruler of this Pluto and Aquarius. And it's like, let's get to the bottom of how these old experiences have created insecurity on an emotional and psychological level. And let's really learn how to strengthen our soul, 8th house, through fortifying our relationship to self. That's that Taurus dynamic. And so that Uranus and Taurus is ruled by Venus in the sign of Aries in the 6th house of this chart. So it's speaking to self-improvement. Self-improvement comes from action. So it's got that Virgo Aries dynamic. We're needing to learn these new values as we liberate from the old, as we get to the bottom of the psychological and emotional content. So we don't ever have to depend on anyone else. So that way we can be in relationships with others on equal terms. I'm here because I want to, not because I need to. It's really this dynamic. This Venus also is the ruler of Jupiter in Taurus in the 8th house. And it's like, it wants us to get to the bottom of these beliefs, these false beliefs that are delusive in nature, right? There's technically a square between Mars and Mars, that Mars-Saturn conjunction to Jupiter and Uranus. So it's like, as we objectify, we culminate and we self-actualize. As we get to the bottom of delusive beliefs about ourselves that have affected our self-esteem and our inner security, we culminate, we restructure our reality, we restructure our consciousness. We get to understand timeless values, timeless principles, natural laws, natural truths, all of these things as a way to really raise and change our vibration and inner magnetism. And Venus is like, hey, take the action, take the initiative. What are you desiring to do? What's the idea coming into your head? Because Uranus and Taurus, I've talked about this many times, that's the inner drumbeat. It is like what idea keeps coming out of nowhere and becomes more frequent. And it's some type of action that is meant to be taken, right? And that Venus ruling it says, yeah, take this, do this, create that action, because it's going to help you self-improve. It's going to help you purge this old stuff. It's going to help you purify this old stuff. It's going to help you culminate this old stuff. Has the ability to really help you be emotionally secure and self-sufficient and, to rely on yourself, to really jettison any type of codependency. This Venus also in the 6th house helps us to have discernment over what action to take, what action is necessary in order to self-improve. This is also a new moon eclipse that can bring up anger for us to work with it. I've talked about this a bit in the video with Rav Shahal where we went over both of these, but there's a couple of things that I want to expand upon on that, which is like anger is an Aries thing. It's a naturally occurring dynamic. And it's interesting because Aries is the polarity of Libra. And oftentimes we feel anger towards ourselves whenever we acquiesce and self-abandon, and that can be part of a Libra dynamic. Like we abandon our values for the sake of maintaining a relationship because it's known and familiar, right? These dynamics can be coming up for us to liberate from them. Anger can also happen because we're not listened to, we're not understood, we're not heard from. And really that anger points to, is there something within that you're needing to emotionally nurture and inwardly validate yourself to create a sense of emotional maturity, of emotional nurturance, to be your own parent, to reparent yourself. Anger is, I like to, whenever I worked in mental health, I used to tell the girls that I worked with that anger is a secondhand emotion. There's a root underneath the anger. I feel hurt. I feel betrayed. I feel lied to. I feel deceived. I feel upset with myself. It's really, anger can manifest because of so many different underlying emotional dynamics. And it's really interesting because I think that anger sometimes happens, not always, but sometimes because we're suppressing some type of emotional dynamic and it comes out as anger, right? It's like Capricorn can suppress the emotion, Cancer, and that square to Aries is like, Capricorn, whereas like, here's a metaphor. Cancer's the beach ball, Capricorn's the hand that's holding it under the water and suppressing those emotions. And eventually Aries is that force that gets the beach ball to pop up and go sideways, right? It's like we really want to be self-reflective and work with this energy in order to understand ourselves. Like this can be a solar eclipse that gets us to really understand our anger and where it's coming from in order to dissolve old dynamics that perpetuated the anger. This can be like really healing anger towards oneself by forgiving oneself. It goes back to what I told you my dad said to me, where he said, George, you don't ever have to be that person again if you don't want to, meaning that I don't ever have to make choices that I once made before. And that's the beauty of Aries, is we learn from our choices, from the action. So we get to create discernment around what new action do we want to take? Is it something that I'm really desiring? Or is the lesson in saying no, being responsible with my choice? It's this solar eclipse can bring up all of this. The other dynamic is there is a yod going on in this chart, and it is between the South Node in Libra which is stationed, by the way, so it amps up like the past, right? This energy of the past. It is in conjunct the Mars-Saturn conjunction. And then that south node is also in conjunct Jupiter and Taurus in that 8th house. And to me, this is like really going back to through action, it creates self-improvement that helps us dissolve and restructure how we view ourselves so we can expand upon our relationship to self. There's a need to look at how beliefs have a cause and effect in our relationship to self, and those beliefs about ourselves have an effect on our relationships. That's that south node in Libra and Jupiter and Taurus. And through really looking at this and expanding upon this information, there's a dissolving process that can take shape, and we can understand what action it is that we're wanting to take at this time through listening to our inner voice and our inner intuition. All right. And that is this dynamic with this solar eclipse is like really cultivating this ability to trust oneself so we can act on our instinct. So we can act on our instinct, so we can create action and make choices that help us to self-improve and to heal and to dissolve. The other thing I want to talk about is Lilith in this chart is in Sag in the 2nd house, and it's retrograde, and it's ruled by Jupiter and Taurus in that 8th house. So it's in a wider opposition, but it's still wide. And Lilith is like where we stay whole onto ourselves. Think about the myth of Lilith. She wouldn't submit to Adam, so she left in a fiery rage. So leaving really represents not submitting to patriarchal values, and because of not submitting, being able to stay whole into oneself, to remain in our natural truth. And Lilith in the sign of Sag really amps that up, especially because Lilith is ruled by Jupiter and Taurus in the 8th house. So this has the ability to, like, we're recovering who we each are on a soul level as a way to expand upon our relationship to self in order to strengthen our soul. And the keen wisdom that Lilith has to offer is to thine own self be true, to know oneself. You can stay whole unto yourself. And this really, speaks to this astrology of this solar eclipse. Lilith is also square to Mars and Saturn. It's like, no, Saturn and Pisces has been about like dissolving man-made structures, man-made laws, man-made conditioning, what's been learned. And Lilith is square to this, and it's like in a last quarter square. So it's like, what do you want to believe? Are you going to believe that, or are you going to believe your truth, your intuition about yourself? Are you going to believe delusions that have been learned, or are you going to reconnect with your soul-centeredness, your own sacredness, your own holiness? What are your values? What are your needs? How do you meet them for yourself? How do you self-actualize through that? These are all questions that I have been asking myself throughout this time through looking at this astrology. And this is a great time to write and journal about this. This is a great time, like if you're wanting to purge and purify old relational dynamics, to use fire. Maybe you got something from someone and you want to burn it, maybe you want to fire gaze and merge with that because it feels cleansing and purifying. Maybe you want to gaze at a fire and put old memories into it to purge them and to manifest something new, to cultivate a a sense of soul-centeredness or healthy self-esteem, this is a time where you could really do this, like burning something to purge or purify it while speaking love and thanks into it for the journey, and having the intention with the utmost sincerity to give oneself permission to be self-focused right now in order to understand oneself and expand upon their inner relationship like that. I mean, I'm like, maybe this is what I need to do as I'm saying it out loud. But it is like this dynamic. It's like maybe that's the way that you want to start this brand new cycle, is by doing something like that and journaling about it, and you know writing down what you want to manifest and journaling about old things that you want to change your awareness around, and like throwing that into the fire so new awareness about it can be birthed. Like there's so many ways, but this is an Aries, you know uh solar eclipse. Fire is great. I would work with it if I were you, and that's something you feel called to do. um The last thing I want to talk about is, no, there's two more things. Jupiter and Taurus is in a disseminating trine to Ceres in the sign of Capricorn. And this really speaks to, Ceres is in the third house. So it's like we're taking in information so we can ask and answer our own questions and be in our own, it's to recover our own sense of authority, right? That's Capricorn. And it's trining Jupiter, which means as we do this, we expand upon our inner relationship to self, and we strengthen our soul through being our own authority, through emotionally validating ourselves, through emotionally maturing. There's that. And then the last thing is Juno in Virgo is retrograde, and it's in a yod with Pluto and Aquarius in the fourth house, and with Venus and Aries in the sixth. And Juno and Virgo retrograde in the 11th is really about objectifying where we might have over devoted ourselves to some type of relational dynamic, and it was really more masochistic in nature. Like, I'm gonna stay here no matter what, at all costs, no matter how this person treats me. And it's actually like traumatizing ourselves by doing that. And the need to liberate from those dynamics to create emotional security. And then to act on the desires to culminate these dynamics so we can self-improve upon, so we can learn new values. Because a lot of us, especially I will say, what I've seen with women is there can be this masochistic dynamic going on in our relationships. And I'm not just talking about love. Like, this can be, masochism can be, I am giving my authority to any type of figure that has been deemed an authority. And I'm devoting myself, I'm staying with it because that's what I've learned. Or it can be, I'm getting paid less for the same job that my colleague is doing who's a man, but it feels secure to stay here because it's known. It's like, no, there is something here for a lot of us. And I mean, for men, there can be masochism as well. You know, but there's this dynamic of really needing to look at what we devote ourselves to, and if that has created trauma, and if we have been a part of traumatizing ourselves through over devoting ourselves to something for a cause, for a namesake, um for the sake of comfort, for the sake of depending upon something, right? So this is your week, this is your solar eclipse. The last thing I want to say is I am still going to be doing discounted readings for this week and next week for this eclipse. If you're wanting to know how this impacts you, I am going to be doing eclipse readings. So looking at your natal chart and these transits for $75. This is an hour and a half reading. It's over Zoom. I record it. I will email it to you. As I said this, it's just reminding me I need to email someone's video I did. And this is really looking at like what's wanting to start in your life and what is wanting to end, what's wanting to culminate. If you want to book this, go on my website, book a natal reading. It says $200 next to it. Omit that. Book the natal reading, and you'll receive an email with your Zoom link and how to pay. When you send payment, just send the $75. Don't do the regular fee. As always, I work with people on a sliding scale. So after this, if you want a reading and you can't afford to pay the $200, that's fine. I have no judgment towards that. I have a sliding scale. Reach out to me. I tell so many people this is a service. It's a service that this work has worked so much in my life that I don't want to turn people away. Like, I remember working in mental health, and there were people who couldn't go to therapy because they couldn't afford it or they didn't have insurance. Like, I think back on that, and I never want to be like that. Like, I don't want to be like some capitalist thing. So, and I don't want to commodify this. Like, this is here to help people. If you feel like it would help you and you want a reading, reach out. I love working with people, especially if they feel a calling for growth. Like, that's my jam. Like, I'm here for it. Anyway, I will see you all next week. Be on the lookout for a video I did with my friend B, who is known as the Zine Witch. And we go over the Uranus-Jupiter conjunction. I'm going to be going over the chart and the transit separately, like I do with this. But in that video, it's literally like two astrologer friends who are having an organic conversation about the archetypes of Jupiter, Uranus, Taurus, the conjunction. B has had it happen, like B has it natally in their chart. They have a lot of experience with it. There's just, I feel like it's a rich conversation. It's between two neurodivergent people. So like if you're ADHD or something, like you probably would really like it because it's like playing astrological talk tennis between two people. And it was really fun for me. And I definitely want to do another show where we do the same thing again over some different transit because I enjoyed it. So be on the lookout for that. Anyway, I love each one of you, even if I don't know you. What a time to be alive. Continue doing your work and growing, and know that the value is in the effort, and every bit counts. Even if you feel like you backslide, it's not null and void. You just pick up again and you keep trucking along. And we are living a human experience, and we are meant to feel and to be courageous about our own healing and to take responsibility for it. And for those that do that, I think that it's amazing. So I will see you all soon. I will see you next week. Until then, happy solar eclipse and get the work done.